Look, I'm not saying the Galactic Defense Council made a mistake when they assigned Lieutenant Cassandra Cass Mitchell to perimeter duty on Outpost Delta 7. I'm just saying that when you take a human, specifically a human who once held the record for longest confirmed sniper kill in 3 different star systems, and tell her she's overqualified for active combat operations, maybe you should reconsider what you think perimeter duty actually means.
But hey, what do I know?
I'm just Sergeant Alex Reeves, humble communications officer, whose job it is to sit in this delightfully cramped bunker and watch the show unfold on about 40 different monitors. And brother, what a show it's becoming. The Council's logic, if you can call it that, went something like this. Humans are too aggressive for frontline operations. Too unpredictable. Too creative in their problem-solving approaches. Better to stick them on the quiet postings where they can't cause too much trouble.
Right.
Because nothing says keeping humans out of trouble, like giving them unlimited ammunition, a 12-mile radius to patrol, and absolutely nothing to do for 3 months straight except think about increasingly creative ways to kill things. I should probably back up and explain how we got here, shouldn't I? See, the thing about joining a galactic military alliance is that nobody really tells you how boring most of it is going to be. The recruitment posters, yeah, they have those on 17 different worlds now, thanks to humanity's inexplicably effective propaganda machine. Show brave soldiers standing heroically against cosmic threats. Epic space battles. Dramatic last stands against impossible odds. What they don't show you is 3 months of staring at empty grassland while the most exciting thing that happens is when Corporal Williams finds a new type of beetle and spends 2 hours trying to determine if it's edible. Outpost Delta 7 sits on the edge of Kepler 442b, a garden world that the Council decided needed monitoring, after some long-range scans picked up what the eggheads called unusual energy signatures. Translation: weird stuff might be happening here, but it's probably nothing. So let's stick a skeleton crew on the surface and call it a day. The outpost itself is standard prefab nonsense. 3 buildings, a communication array, and a perimeter fence that wouldn't stop a determined house cat, let alone whatever might actually be out there in the 47,000 square kilometers of absolutely nothing that surrounds us. Our crew consists of myself, Williams, who I mentioned earlier, bug enthusiast and surprisingly good at poker, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, demolitions expert who gets cranky when she doesn't get to blow things up for extended periods, and our fearless leader, Captain Heinrich Braun, who has the remarkable ability to make reading supply requisitions sound like the most important military operation since the Battle of New Geneva. Oh, and Lieutenant Mitchell. Now, Mitchell came to us with what the Council diplomatically called an impressive service record. 3 tours in the Proxima Centauri conflict, 2 in the Vega system cleanup, and 1 very classified operation that supposedly never happened, but somehow earned her a chest full of medals that she's not allowed to wear. The Council's assessment: excellent soldier, but perhaps too enthusiastic for standard operations. The Human Command's assessment: Jesus Christ, do not put her anywhere near active combat unless you want the Geneva Convention rewritten. The compromise: perimeter duty on the galaxy's most boring planet. It seemed like such a good idea at the time. Mitchell arrived on a Tuesday, stepped off the transport with a single duffel bag and a rifle case that looked like it could double as a coffin for someone particularly tall and thin. She was exactly what you'd expect from someone with her reputation. Average height, unremarkable features, the kind of person you'd walk past on the street without a second glance. Right up until you saw her eyes. I've served with a lot of soldiers over the years, and you learn to read people pretty quickly. Most fighters, they've got this edge to them, this barely contained aggression that makes them dangerous in a firefight. Mitchell? She had something different, something that made you think of very deep water, still on the surface, but with currents underneath that could drag you down before you even realized you were drowning. Captain Braun gave her the standard welcome briefing. Patrol schedule, communication protocols, rules of engagement. Standard stuff. Mitchell listened politely, asked a few technical questions about our sensor coverage, and inquired about the local wildlife. Nothing dangerous, Braun assured her. Few herbivores, some small predators. Nothing that should concern a soldier of your caliber. Mitchell nodded. What about the perimeter? How far out do patrols typically go? The fence line covers a 2-kilometer radius around the outpost. Standard patrol route takes you about 3 clicks out, just to make sure nothing's sneaking up on us. And beyond that? Braun shrugged. Beyond that is not our problem. The Council's assessment indicated no threats beyond the immediate area. Mitchell smiled. It was a perfectly pleasant smile. The kind you'd see on a kindergarten teacher or someone's favorite aunt. Somehow it made me want to check my will. Of course, Captain. No threats beyond the immediate area. That was 6 weeks ago. The first sign that things weren't going according to plan came about 2 weeks into Mitchell's rotation. I was monitoring the communication channels when she checked in from her morning patrol. Base, this is Perimeter 1, checking in from grid reference 77 Alpha. I checked the map. Grid 77 Alpha was 8 kilometers from the outpost. Perimeter 1, confirm your position. You're showing 8 clicks out from base. Confirmed, base. 8.2 kilometers. Found some interesting tracks out here. What kind of tracks? The kind that suggest our wildlife assessment might have been a little optimistic. Requesting permission to extend patrol radius to investigate. Captain Braun, who'd been pretending to read reports while actually napping in his chair, suddenly perked up. Negative, Perimeter 1, return to standard patrol route. Copy that, base. Returning to standard route. But here's the thing about Mitchell, she always followed orders. Exactly. To the letter. No creative interpretation, no bending of the rules. Which is why, when she requested permission to establish observation posts to better monitor potential threats approaching the standard patrol route, Braun approved it without thinking twice. And why, when she asked for additional ammunition for extended observation duties, Santos handed over enough rounds to outfit a small army. And why, when she mentioned that effective perimeter security might require positioning assets beyond the immediate fence line to provide adequate early warning, nobody thought to ask exactly how far beyond the fence line she was talking about. 4 weeks after her arrival, I'm staring at a monitor showing Mitchell's GPS beacon 12 kilometers northeast of the outpost, and my communication board is lighting up like a Christmas tree. Base, this is Perimeter 1 contact at 11 kilometers bearing 270. Contact? I grab my headset. Perimeter 1, clarify contact type. Hostile contact. Big hostile contact. Approximately 4 meters tall, lots of teeth, appears to have brought friends. I looked at the tactical display. According to our sensors, there was nothing out there but empty grassland. Perimeter 1, our sensors aren't picking up anything in your area. That's because your sensors are calibrated for normal wildlife, base. This is decidedly not normal wildlife. Engaging now. And that's when the shooting started. Now I've heard a lot of gunfire in my career. Rifle shots, machine guns, artillery, the whole symphony of modern warfare. But Mitchell's rifle made a sound I'd never heard before. A deep, resonant crack that seemed to shake the air itself. Perimeter 1, report status. Target down. Oh, wait. Target getting back up. That's concerning. Crack. Now target is down. Definitely down. Moving to secondary position. Captain Braun stumbled into the communication center, still half asleep and looking confused. What's all the noise about? Lieutenant Mitchell is engaged with hostiles 12 kilometers from base, sir. 12 kilometers? What the hell is she doing 12 kilometers out? Before I could answer, Mitchell's voice crackled over the radio again. Base, be advised, contact strength is larger than initially assessed. Count is now, let's see, approximately 30 hostiles approaching from multiple vectors. 30. 30 of whatever had required 2 shots from Mitchell's rifle to put down. Sir, I said, trying to keep my voice level. I think we might want to scramble a response team. Braun looked at the monitors, then at me, then back at the monitors. Response team? With what? We've got 4 other people on this whole planet. Base, this is Perimeter 1. Contact strength now approximately 60 hostiles. They appear to be coordinating their approach. Quite impressive, actually. Most animals this size lack the cognitive capacity for complex tactical movement. Lieutenant Mitchell. Braun grabbed the radio. I'm ordering you to fall back to base immediately. Negative, base. Hostiles are moving toward the outpost. If I fall back now, they'll be inside your perimeter in approximately 30 minutes. Crack, 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 make that 58 hostiles. Santos appeared in the doorway, looking more awake than the rest of us. What's the situation? Mitchell's fighting off an army of something 12 kilometers out, I explained. Santos blinked. By herself? Crack 57 hostiles. Mitchell's voice drifted over the radio, conversational as ever. Base, you might want to prep the defenses, just in case. What defenses? Braun demanded. We've got a fence in harsh language. Sir, Santos said quietly, I might have some materials that could help with that. I should mention that Santos has a very specific definition of materials. In her world, most problems can be solved with the proper application of high explosives. She's not wrong as often as you might think. Perimeter 1, this is base. What's your ammunition status? Sufficient for current engagement, base, though I might need to adjust tactics soon. Adjust how? Well, they're adapting to my current position. Flanking maneuvers, suppressive movement patterns, quite sophisticated for local fauna. I'm going to need to get creative, and that's when we lost her GPS signal. Now, before you panic, let me explain something about Lieutenant Mitchell's idea of creative. See, most soldiers, when they talk about creative tactics, they mean things like using smoke grenades for concealment or setting up crossfires. Standard stuff, just applied in novel ways. Mitchell's idea of creative tactics involves things that make demolitions experts nervous and cause commanding officers to develop drinking problems. The GPS signal cutting out wasn't a malfunction. It was intentional. Because apparently, one of the things they don't tell you about advanced sniper training is that sometimes, if you really want to mess with your enemy's head, you make them think you've disappeared. Base, this is Perimeter 1. The voice came from a different direction now, maybe 2 kilometers south of her last position. Perimeter 1, what's your status? We lost your GPS. Had to go mobile, Base. These things are smarter than I gave them credit for. They were zeroing in on my position. Crack. Contact strength now 43 hostiles. They're regrouping. 43, meaning she'd taken out at least 17 of whatever these things were. Lieutenant, Braun said, I'm ordering you to return to base immediately. Can't do that, sir. They've got the direct route covered. I'm going to have to circle around. Then circle around, that's an order. Of course, sir. Circling around now. Mitchell always followed orders. That's what made her so dangerous. Because when she said she was going to circle around, what she meant was that she was going to establish a series of hide positions in a 12-kilometer radius around the outpost and systematically eliminate every hostile target that came within range. What she didn't mention was that her definition of range was considerably more flexible than most people's. Over the next 4 hours, the radio chatter painted a picture that was equal parts impressive and terrifying. Base, contact at Grid 44 Charlie, 3 hostiles neutralized. Base, tracks indicate main force split into smaller groups. Hunting parties, maybe. Engaging northern group now. Base, these things are definitely not in our wildlife database. Recommend updating threat assessment when this is over. Base, found their nest. Or camp. Or whatever you call it when 13-foot-tall predators get together for a planning session. You're going to want to see this. By hour 6, the radio had gone quiet. Perimeter 1, report status, I called. Nothing. Perimeter 1, please respond. Still nothing. Braun was pacing the communication center like a caged animal. Santos was methodically checking her explosive inventory, which is what she does when she's worried. Williams was staring out the window like he expected to see monsters charging across the grassland at any moment. And I was running every scan I could think of, trying to find some trace of Lieutenant Mitchell in the electronic wasteland that surrounded our little outpost. Sir, I said finally, we need to call for backup. With what justification? Braun demanded. That one of our soldiers went rogue and started a private war 12 kilometers outside our area of responsibility? With the justification that she might be dead, sir. That shut everyone up. Because the thing is, we all knew Mitchell's reputation. We'd all heard the stories. But stories are just stories, and this was real life. And real life has a way of humbling even the most impressive soldiers. Sir, Santos said quietly, she's not dead. How can you be sure? Because if she was dead, those things would be here by now. And that's when the radio crackled back to life. Base, this is Perimeter 1. Perimeter 1! I nearly shouted into the microphone. Report your status! Status is... well, it's complicated, Base. Good news is, immediate threat to the outpost has been neutralized. Neutralized how? All hostiles are dead, Base. All of them? Well, I mean, there might be a few stragglers out there somewhere, but the main force is definitely out of commission. Braun grabbed the radio. Lieutenant, what exactly did you do? I followed your orders, sir. I circled around. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Sir, with respect, you told me to handle perimeter security. The perimeter is now secure. The perimeter is 2 kilometers from the outpost. Was 2 kilometers, sir. I've taken the liberty of expanding it. To what? 12 kilometers in all directions, sir. Nothing hostile is getting within 12 kilometers of this outpost. And that's when it hit me. The title of our little adventure here. They assigned her on perimeter duty. Now the kill zone starts 12 kilometers outside the fence. Because that's exactly what Mitchell had done. She'd turned a 12-kilometer radius around our outpost into a free-fire zone where anything that moved without permission got turned into a very expensive science experiment. Lieutenant, Braun said slowly, please return to base for debriefing. Of course, sir. Be there in 30 minutes. She actually made it in 25. Mitchell walked into the outpost looking exactly like she had when she'd left that morning, except for a few grass stains on her uniform and what appeared to be purple blood splattered across her boots. Purple blood? Santos asked, staring at the stains. Local fauna has a copper-based circulatory system, Mitchell explained matter-of-factly. Gives their blood a distinctly purple hue. Quite fascinating, actually. How many did you kill? Braun demanded. Mitchell considered the question seriously. Define kill, sir. What do you mean, define kill? Well, Some of them required multiple shots to stop moving. Are we counting individual rounds fired or just the number of targets that eventually stopped being a threat? Braun stared at her. How many targets eventually stopped being a threat? 73 confirmed, sir. Possibly 74, but number 74 fell into a ravine, and I couldn't get a clear visual confirmation of termination. 73? Give or take, sir? Santos whistled low. 73 of those 4-meter-tall things? By yourself? They weren't all 4 meters tall, Mitchell corrected. The big ones were about 4 meters. The smaller ones were only about 3 meters. And then there were the juveniles, which were maybe 2.5 meters. How many shots did you fire? I asked, partly because I was curious and partly because I was responsible for ammunition inventory. Mitchell thought about it. 137 rounds. 137 rounds to kill 73 targets? Some of them were quite resilient, Sergeant, and I had to account for range, wind conditions, and the fact that they were actively trying to kill me. Braun sat down heavily in his chair. Lieutenant, what exactly were these things? Well, sir, based on my observations, I'd classify them as an apex predator species, highly intelligent, capable of coordinated tactical behavior, and definitely not native to this region. Not native? The tracks I found suggest they migrated here recently, maybe within the last few weeks, which would explain why they didn't show up in the original surveys. Migrated from where? Mitchell smiled that kindergarten teacher smile again. That's an excellent question, sir. Which is why I took the liberty of conducting a more thorough reconnaissance of the area. More thorough how? I followed their trail back to its source. And I found something the Council is definitely going to want to know about. She reached into her pack and pulled out a small device that looked like a cross between a communicator and a calculator, covered in symbols I didn't recognize. What is that? Santos asked. Near as I can tell, it's some kind of remote monitoring device, possibly a scout probe. The creatures I eliminated were apparently guarding a cache of these things about 15 kilometers northwest of here. Braun stared at the device. You found a cache of alien technology? Approximately 200 similar devices, sir, all apparently designed for surveillance and data collection. And you didn't think to report this immediately? Well, sir, I was somewhat occupied with preventing the outpost from being overrun by hostile forces. Which was, I had to admit, a fair point. Sir, I said, if these things were guarding alien surveillance equipment, then this isn't a monitoring station anymore, Braun finished. This is a first contact situation. And that's when things got really interesting. Because it turns out that when you're dealing with potential first contact scenarios, the Galactic Defense Council has very specific protocols. And those protocols do not include allowing human soldiers to single-handedly eliminate the local security forces and make off with classified alien technology. The response team arrived 6 hours later. And by response team, I mean a full diplomatic envoy, 3 squads of council peacekeepers, a xenobiology team, a cultural analysis unit, and approximately enough bureaucrats to fill a small moon. Leading the whole circus was Council Diplomat Tavara, a 7-foot-tall insectoid with compound eyes, and a personality that could make watching paint dry seem exciting by comparison. Captain Braun, Tavara buzzed in that way that all the council species seem to manage, explained to me how a routine monitoring mission resulted in the deaths of 73 members of a previously unknown sapient species. Well, you see, Diplomat Tavara, we didn't know they were sapient. They were using tools, Captain. They demonstrated coordinated tactical behavior. They were guarding technology. How much more evidence of sapience did you require? Mitchell, who had been standing at attention throughout this exchange, spoke up. With respect, Diplomat Tavara, they also tried to kill me. Tavara's compound eyes focused on Mitchell with the kind of attention that usually precedes someone having a very bad day. Lieutenant Mitchell, your service record indicates a disturbing pattern of excessive force in first contact situations. Diplomat Tavara, my service record indicates a pattern of keeping human colonies from being wiped out by hostile forces. The excessive force determinations were all made by people who weren't actually being shot at. You single-handedly eliminated an entire scouting force. Yes, ma'am. That's what scouting forces are for, to scout. They were scouting our defensive capabilities with the apparent intent of mounting an attack. I demonstrated our defensive capabilities. By killing them all. By stopping them from killing us. The death part was just how it worked out. Tavara made us sound like a swarm of angry bees. Lieutenant, you may have just started an interstellar war. Mitchell considered this. Or I may have just ended one before it started. And you know what? She might have been right. Because when the xenobiology team finally analyzed the surveillance equipment Mitchell had recovered, they found something interesting. The devices weren't just collecting information about our outpost. They were collecting information about human military capabilities, defensive systems, population centers, and resource distribution across 17 different star systems. Someone had sent those creatures to spy on us, and when Mitchell had stumbled across their operation, they'd tried to eliminate the threat. They'd just picked the wrong human to mess with. The diplomatic fallout took 3 weeks to sort out. The Council wanted to court-martial Mitchell for unauthorized use of force. The human military wanted to promote her for preventing a potentially catastrophic intelligence breach. The xenobiology team wanted to study her to figure out how one human had managed to outfight an entire pack of apex predators. In the end, they compromised. Mitchell got a commendation for exceptional performance in the face of hostile contact, a reprimand for exceeding authorized patrol parameters, and a transfer to a new assignment that the Council diplomatically described as more suited to her particular skill set, which is how she ended up commanding the security detail for the new deep space early warning stations. You know, the ones where her job is to make sure nothing hostile gets within 20 kilometers of our sensor arrays. The Council apparently never learns. As for me, I got promoted to Staff Sergeant and transferred to a nice, quiet communications post on New Geneva, where the most exciting thing that happens is the weekly equipment inventory and the occasional request for weather updates. It's peaceful here. Boring even. Sometimes late at night when I'm monitoring the communications channels, I pick up transmissions from the early warning stations. Usually it's just routine check-ins and status reports. But sometimes, if you listen carefully, you can hear Mitchell's voice crackling over the interstellar communication arrays. Deep Space Station Alpha 7 to control. Routine patrol complete. Perimeter is secure out to 25 kilometers. No contacts. 25 kilometers. The Council authorized her for 20. Some things never change. And somewhere out there in the dark between the stars, there's a human soldier making sure that nothing hostile gets close enough to our worlds to cause trouble. Making sure that the next time some alien species decides to test humanity's defenses, they learn the same lesson that those creatures on Kepler 442b learned. You don't mess with humans on perimeter duty, because when humans are assigned to protect something, they take that assignment very, very seriously. And their definition of perimeter is a lot more flexible than you might think. End. So, picture this. You're a highly evolved, technologically superior alien species who's spent the last 3 millennia building the most advanced galactic civilization known to, well, yourself. You've got faster-than-light travel, immortality treatments, and the ability to synthesize matter from pure energy. You've conquered death, disease, and the universal problem of finding a decent parking spot on space stations. And then some bipedal apes from a backwater death world show up and completely ruin your Tuesday. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to when everything started going sideways, which, coincidentally, was about 30 seconds after humanity joined the Galactic Council. Captain Eric Volkov stood in the pristine corridors of Council Station Omega-7, watching a Zeltharian customs officer named Vexthara make what would arguably become the worst decision in galactic history. The kind of decision that historians would later mark as the day everything changed, or when the humans stopped playing nice. Or, as one particularly dramatic Quirellian scholar put it, the moment the death world woke up. Eric was there on routine business, just dropping off some trade agreements and picking up a few diplomatic pouches. Standard stuff. The kind of boring paperwork that kept the galaxy spinning and gave bureaucrats something to feel important about. He'd brought his daughter Emma along because, hey, what 12-year-old wouldn't want to see a real space station? Emma was doing what human children do best. Being absolutely fascinated by everything, while simultaneously driving the local aliens into nervous breakdowns. She was currently pressed against a viewing port, watching cargo ships dock with the wide-eyed wonder that only kids can muster. "Dad, look, that one's got like 16 engines," she said, bouncing on her toes. "And that purple ship has tentacles for landing gear. This place is so cool." Eric smiled. Emma had inherited her mother's curiosity and his stubborn streak, a combination that made her simultaneously delightful and dangerous. Kind of like humanity in general, come to think of it. That's when Officer Vexthara decided to have her career-ending moment. Now, to be fair to Vexthara, she was having a rough day. Her species, the Zeltharians, were what you might politely call high-strung. Think of the most neurotic person you know. Give them 6 arms, compound eyes, and an exoskeleton. Then put them in charge of customs enforcement. They were the kind of beings who alphabetized their sock drawers and had panic attacks when someone parked slightly crooked. Vexthara had been dealing with what she considered increasing human irregularities all morning. Humans who didn't fill out forms in triplicate. Humans who made jokes during security screenings. Humans who had the audacity to smile at her for no apparent reason. By the time Emma came skipping down the corridor, Vexthara's patience had worn thinner than her species' diplomatic immunity. "Stop that immediately!" Vexthara chittered in her buzzing voice, all 6 arms waving frantically at Emma. "Juvenile humans, cease your chaotic locomotion patterns!" Emma stopped bouncing and looked up at the 8-foot-tall insectoid with confusion. "I'm sorry, I was just looking at the ships. Viewing restrictions are clearly posted. No unauthorized observation of vessel configurations. Your species' apparent inability to follow basic protocols is—" "Hey now," Eric interrupted, stepping forward with the kind of calm that parents develop after years of dealing with playground disputes. "She's just looking out the window. There's no harm in—" "Do not interrupt official proceedings!" Vexthara's voice rose to an angry buzz. "Your offspring has violated Council Regulation 27 Alpha regarding restricted observation zones." Eric glanced at the supposed restricted zone, which was literally just a public viewing area with benches specifically designed for sightseeing. The regulation Vexthara was citing was apparently posted in tiny Zeltharian script that would have required a microscope to read. "Look, officer." Eric squinted at her name badge. "Vexthara. My daughter wasn't doing anything wrong. She's just a kid who's excited to see spaceships. Maybe we could—" That's when Vexthara made her fatal mistake. Whether it was stress, xenophobia, or just plain stupidity, she suddenly lunged forward with one of her chitinous arms and struck Emma across the face with enough force to send the 12-year-old sprawling across the deck plating. The sound echoed through the corridor like a gunshot. Emma hit the ground hard, her head bouncing off the metal flooring with a sickening crack. Blood immediately began pooling beneath her blonde hair, and she lay perfectly still. For approximately 2.3 seconds, the universe held its breath. Then Eric moved. If you've never seen a human parent respond to a threat against their child, let me paint you a picture. Imagine every predatory instinct that evolution spent millions of years perfecting, compressed into a single moment of absolute clarity. Now imagine that this particular human parent happened to be a former Special Forces operator who'd spent 15 years in some of the galaxy's most dangerous conflicts before settling down to civilian life. Vexthara never saw him coming. One moment she was standing there, probably about to cite another regulation. The next moment she was missing her head. Eric's combat knife, a simple piece of carbon steel that had somehow made it through 3 different security checkpoints, had separated Vexthara's cranium from her thorax with surgical precision. Green ichor splattered across the pristine white walls as her compound eyes went dark. "Medic!" Eric's voice boomed through the station's corridors as he dropped to his knees beside Emma, his hands checking for a pulse while simultaneously applying pressure to her head wound. "I need a medic now!" The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd just committed what was arguably an act of war, and his first priority was still getting help for his daughter. Now, if you're a student of galactic politics, you might be thinking, surely this was just an unfortunate incident that could be resolved through proper diplomatic channels. You'd be wrong, but I admire your optimism. The Galactic Council had some very specific rules about violence on their stations. The kind of rules that usually resulted in the perpetrator being ejected into space without a suit. But they'd never had to deal with a human parent protecting their child before. Within minutes, the station was crawling with Council security forces. Emma was rushed to the medical bay while Eric was surrounded by approximately 40 armed officers, all pointing various energy weapons at his chest. "Drop your weapon and surrender immediately," barked Commander Zeftok, a militant Rigelian whose species took great pride in their military prowess. "You have committed murder on a Council station." Eric looked down at the knife in his hand, then at Vexthara's headless corpse, then back at the commander. His expression was the kind of calm that made smart people very, very nervous. "My daughter," he said quietly, "is 12 years old. That is irrelevant too. She was looking at spaceships through a window. The deceased officer was enforcing—" "And your officer," Eric continued, his voice never rising above conversational level, "struck a child hard enough to crack her skull open." Commander Zeftok's mandibles twitched uncertainly. He'd studied human psychology as part of his training, But the textbooks had been frustratingly vague about how humans responded to threats against their offspring. Something about extreme protective instincts and caution advised. "You will be detained pending a full investigation," Zeftok declared, though he made no move to actually approach Eric. The deceased officer was acting within her authority. Eric's smile was the kind that predators wore just before they struck. "Commander," he said pleasantly, "are you familiar with human history?" "I fail to see how. We're not a particularly advanced species by your standards. No energy weapons, no faster-than-light travel until recently, no immortality treatments. But we do have one area of expertise that might interest you." The security forces shifted nervously. Energy weapons stayed trained on Eric, but nobody seemed eager to pull the trigger. "And what would that be?" Zeftok asked, though something in his voice suggested he really didn't want to know. "We're really, really good at killing things that hurt our children." The human embassy received word of the incident exactly 17 minutes after Vexthara lost her head. By minute 18, Ambassador David Sterling was on the comm with Earth's Colonial Defense Force. By minute 19, the CDF had issued a fleet-wide alert. By minute 20, every human ship within 50 light-years had changed course for Council Station Omega-7. Now you have to understand something about humanity's relationship with the Galactic Council. We were the new kids on the block, barely 50 years into our membership, still figuring out the rules, generally trying to play nice with the established powers. Most species saw us as curious but harmless primitives, who might eventually evolve into something useful. The Council had been very clear about humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy. We were junior members at best, tolerated more than welcomed, expected to be grateful for the privilege of their advanced civilization. That attitude was about to change dramatically. "Ambassador Sterling," came the crisp voice of Admiral Rebecca Hayes over the quantum communicator. "I understand we have a situation." Sterling looked out his office window at the growing crowd of alien dignitaries gathering in the station's central plaza. Word was spreading fast, and the various species were clearly agitated. The Zeltharians were demanding immediate justice. The militant Regelians were calling for Eric's execution. Even the usually peaceful Altarians were making noises about proper consequences for violence. "That's putting it mildly, Admiral," Sterling replied. "Captain Volkov is currently in custody for killing a council officer who assaulted his daughter. The girl is in critical condition." "I see. And the Council's position?" "They're treating it as murder, pure and simple. They want to make an example of him." There was a long pause on the other end of the comm. When Admiral Hayes spoke again, her voice carried the kind of Arctic chill that had made enemy commanders reconsider their life choices. "Ambassador, please relay the following message to the Council leadership. Humanity considers any attack on our children to be an act of war. Captain Volkov was defending his daughter from an unprovoked assault. If the Council wishes to treat this as a criminal matter, they're welcome to try." Sterling felt his stomach drop. "Admiral, with respect, we can't afford to antagonize the entire Galactic Council over—" "Ambassador," Hayes interrupted. "Let me be very clear about something. The Colonial Defense Force has spent the last 50 years preparing for the possibility that our so-called allies might one day decide we're more trouble than we're worth. We have contingency plans, we have resources, and we have absolutely zero tolerance for anyone who hurts human children. But the political ramifications are irrelevant." "How's the girl?" Sterling pulled up the medical reports on his screen. "Severe concussion, possible brain bleeding. The doctors aren't sure yet." "Then I suggest the Council prays she recovers. Because if that little girl dies, diplomacy is off the table." The comm went silent, leaving Sterling alone with the uncomfortable realization that humanity's peaceful integration into galactic society was about to come to a very abrupt end. In the station's detention center, Eric sat in a cell designed for beings considerably larger than humans. The energy barriers hummed softly, casting everything in a pale blue glow. He'd been sitting perfectly still for 3 hours, hands folded in his lap, staring at the wall with the kind of patience that made his guards increasingly nervous. A Quellian psychologist named Dr. Morveth had been brought in to evaluate his mental state. The Quellians prided themselves on their understanding of alien psychology, particularly their ability to predict and control violent tendencies in primitive species. "Captain Volkov, Doctor," Morveth began, his crystalline voice carrying undertones of superiority that his species couldn't quite suppress. "I am here to assess your psychological condition following your episode." Eric turned to look at him. The Quellian was a tall, ethereal being that looked like someone had carved an angel out of living glass. Beautiful in an otherworldly way, also completely incapable of understanding what he was dealing with. "Episode?" Eric asked mildly. "Your violent outburst. The unprovoked murder of Officer Vexthara." Such behavior suggests significant psychological instability that requires immediate treatment. Unprovoked, Eric repeated as if tasting the word. Doctor, are you a parent? The Quellians have evolved beyond such primitive reproductive arrangements. We reproduce through synchronized consciousness merging that. So that's a no. Dr. Morveth's crystalline features shifted in what might have been annoyance. Captain, your species' attachment to biological offspring is well documented, but ultimately counterproductive to psychological development. Your reaction was disproportionate to the stimulus. Eric was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was conversational, almost friendly. Doctor, let me explain something about humans that your textbooks probably missed. We don't just love our children. We would burn down the entire galaxy to keep them safe. And when someone hurts our kids, we don't stop to consider proportional responses or diplomatic consequences. We just eliminate the threat. Such thinking is precisely why your species requires... My daughter is 12 years old, Eric continued, as if the psychologist hadn't spoken. She likes drawing pictures of spaceships and reading adventure stories. She collects rocks from every planet she visits and keeps them in a shoebox under her bed. Yesterday, she asked me if aliens dream the same way humans do. Dr. Morveth shifted uncomfortably. I fail to see the relevance. Today, a council officer struck her hard enough to fracture her skull because she was looking out a window. So I killed that officer. If another council officer threatens my daughter, I'll kill them too. If the entire council decides to make this their problem, then they'll discover just how creative humans can get when someone hurts our children. The detention center fell silent, except for the hum of the energy barriers. Dr. Morveth stared at Eric with the growing realization that all of his psychological training had been woefully inadequate for this situation. Captain, he said carefully, surely you understand that your actions have consequences. The council cannot allow violence on their stations to go unpunished. Eric's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Doctor, has anyone explained to you what happened the last time someone declared war on humanity's children? The answer to that question was currently approaching Council Station Omega-7 at maximum burn. The CDF heavy cruiser Retribution had been conducting training exercises near the Vega system when Admiral Hayes' orders came through. Captain Maria Santos had immediately pushed her ship's engines past their safety limits, shaving 6 hours off their arrival time. The Retribution wasn't humanity's largest or most advanced warship, but she was built for one purpose: making problems disappear permanently. Her crew of 800 had been selected for their ability to think creatively under pressure and their absolute loyalty to human interests. Ma'am, reported Lieutenant Commander Alex Winters from the tactical station, we're getting multiple sensor contacts. Looks like half the Council fleet is converging on our position. Captain Santos studied the tactical display with professional interest. 12 Council vessels, ranging from Zeltharian patrol cruisers to a massive Rigelian dreadnought. Individually, any one of them outgunned the Retribution. Collectively, they represented enough firepower to sterilize a small planet. Any word from the other human ships? Santos asked. CDF Vengeance is 3 hours out. The Defiance and Resolute are 6 hours behind her. Captain Morrison's squadron from Titan Base should arrive sometime tomorrow. Santos nodded. And our passenger? Winters glanced toward the ship's aft sections, where they'd hastily installed a specialized containment unit. Secure and ready for deployment, ma'am. Good. Open a channel to the Council fleet. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of what was obviously the Rigelian flagship. Commander Zeftok appeared, his mandibles spread in what his species considered an aggressive display. Human vessel, he announced. You will maintain your current position and prepare to be boarded. Any deviation from your current course will be considered an act of aggression. Santos leaned back in her command chair, radiating the kind of casual confidence that made enemy commanders reconsider their tactics. Commander Zeftok, I presume. I'm Captain Santos of the CDF Retribution. I believe you have one of our people in custody. The human terrorist will face justice for his crimes against the Council. Your presence here is noted but irrelevant. Terrorist? Santos' eyebrows rose. Commander, Captain Volkov was protecting his 12-year-old daughter from an unprovoked attack. Where I come from, we call that parenting. The deceased officer was enforcing lawful... The deceased officer, Santos interrupted, assaulted a human child. That makes her a legitimate military target under our rules of engagement. The bridge of the Rigelian flagship fell silent. After a moment, Zeftok's mandibles began twitching in what humans had learned to recognize as extreme agitation. Captain Santos, you cannot seriously be suggesting that the murder of a council officer was justified. Santos's smile was sharp and predatory. Commander, let me ask you something. If a foreign military officer walked up to one of your offspring and struck them hard enough to crack their skull, what would your response be? That would be an act of war, Santos finished. which is exactly how humanity views this situation. Captain Volkov defended his daughter from an unprovoked attack by a hostile foreign military officer. The fact that this occurred on a council station doesn't change the fundamental nature of the incident. You are being deliberately obtuse. One human killed a council officer over a minor disciplinary action. Minor. Santos's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Commander, that minor disciplinary action put a 12-year-old girl in critical condition. Brain trauma. Possible permanent damage. And your people want to execute her father for protecting her. The comm channel crackled with static as various council commanders began arguing among themselves in their native languages. Santos could make out angry Zeltharian chittering, deep Altarian harmonics, and what sounded like militant Rigelian battle cant. Captain Santos, Zevtok said finally, the council cannot allow this precedent to stand. If we permit humans to kill our officers with impunity, then perhaps your officers should avoid assaulting human children, Santos replied pleasantly. But since we're discussing precedents, let me establish one for you. Any council officer who harms a human child will be considered an enemy combatant. Their death will be swift, permanent, and non-negotiable. You cannot threaten the entire council. Commander, I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply explaining the natural consequences of certain actions. Rather like gravity, you can ignore it, but that doesn't make falling any less dangerous. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the Retribution's bridge in relative silence. Ma'am, Winters said quietly. The council fleet is moving to surround us. Santos nodded. Expected. What's our status on the special package? Ready for deployment on your order. Good. Send a message to Captain Volkov. Tell him his ride home is here. In the council chambers, panic was setting in with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Representatives from 47 different species were all talking at once, creating a cacophony that would have impressed a death metal concert. High Counselor Vex Thul, a distant cousin of the deceased Vex Thara, was attempting to maintain order with the same success rate as a wet paper towel trying to stop a hurricane. Order! Order! He chittered, his 6 arms waving frantically. We must address this human aggression with unified action. Aggression! Boomed Ambassador Torvin, the human representative who'd been hastily recalled from a mining conference on Kepler 442b. He was a big man with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that came from years of hard living in space. High Counselor, one of your officers assaulted a human child. The child's father defended her. This isn't aggression, it's basic parental instinct. The death of Officer Vex Thara was a criminal act that was entirely justified, Torvin interrupted. And if the council wants to press charges, we're happy to discuss the matter in court, right after we address the unprovoked assault on a human minor by a council officer. The Quellian representative, a being who looked like a living prism, spoke up in harmonious tones. Ambassador Torvin, surely you understand that violence cannot be the answer to every dispute. Counselor Shalveth, my people have a saying. Don't start none, won't be none. Your officer started it. Captain Volkov finished it. Seems straightforward to me. But the precedent is that anyone who hurts human children gets to meet their maker. I'd think that's a precedent most civilized beings could support. High Counselor Vex Thul's compound eyes turned toward the tactical display showing the human fleet's approach. Ambassador, your warships are approaching our station in clear violation of council space. Torvin glanced at the display with professional interest. Those aren't warships, High Counselor. They're diplomatic escorts. We humans have learned that diplomacy works better when backed by superior firepower. You cannot intimidate the council into what? Not prosecuting a man who defended his child from assault? High Counselor, let me make something crystal clear. If you want to turn this into a legal matter, we're happy to oblige. But it goes both ways. We'll press charges against Officer Vex Thara's chain of command for failing to properly train their personnel, against the station commander for allowing the assault to occur, and against anyone else who contributed to putting a human child in the hospital. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Zeltharians looked increasingly agitated. The militant Rigelians were muttering among themselves in what sounded like tactical assessments. Even the usually composed Altarians seemed disturbed. Furthermore, Torvin continued, we're invoking Article 15 of the Galactic Accords regarding crimes against civilian populations. Any species that permits or condones violence against human children will be considered hostile to human interests. Article 15 only applies to acts of war, protested the Rigelian military attaché. And assaulting the child of a serving human officer certainly qualifies. Unless, of course, the council would prefer to treat this as a civil matter, in which case we'll be happy to settle things through proper compensation and reforms to prevent future incidents. High Counselor Vex Thul's mandibles clicked nervously. What kind of compensation are humans seeking? Torvin smiled, and every alien in the chamber felt a chill run down their various spinal analogs. Nothing unreasonable. Full medical coverage for the child's treatment and any long-term care she might need. Formal apology from the Council acknowledging that Officer Vexthara acted improperly. Immediate release of Captain Volkov with all charges dropped. And his smile grew wider. A formal agreement that any Council officer who harms a human child will be immediately terminated and handed over to human authorities for trial. That's completely unacceptable. Then I guess it's a war, Torvin said pleasantly. Your choice, High Counselor. On the CDF Retribution, Captain Santos was putting the finishing touches on what her crew had dubbed Operation Teachable Moment. The plan was elegantly simple. Remind the Galactic Council why humanity had survived long enough to reach the stars in the first place. Ma'am, reported Lieutenant Commander Winters, we're receiving a transmission from the Council station. They're demanding our immediate withdrawal. Any word on the Volkov girl's condition? Latest medical reports show she's stable but still critical. Doctors say the next few hours will be crucial. Santos nodded grimly. Emma Volkov's condition was the deciding factor in how this situation would unfold. If she recovered fully, there might still be room for diplomacy. If she didn't... Captain, the communications officer called out. Incoming transmission from Admiral Hayes. The main screen flickered to show the Admiral's stern features. Behind her, Santos could see the bridge of the CDF flagship Nemesis, the pride of humanity's space fleet. Captain Santos, what's your tactical assessment? 12 Council vessels in defensive formation around the station. They're taking this seriously, but they're not sure how far we're willing to push things. And our special cargo? Ready for deployment. The package should provide sufficient motivation for reasonable discussion. Admiral Hayes nodded approvingly. Excellent. Captain, you are authorized to proceed with your mission as you see fit. Make it clear to the Council that humanity doesn't make idle threats. Understood, Admiral. What about diplomatic fallout? Let me worry about the politicians. Your job is to get Captain Volkov and his daughter home safely. Whatever it takes. The transmission ended, leaving Santos with the kind of broad operational authority that made her crew very, very happy. Nothing motivated a human warrior like being told to solve a problem with maximum creativity and minimal oversight. All hands, this is the captain, Santos announced over the ship's intercom. In approximately 30 minutes, we're going to remind the Galactic Council why you don't mess with human children. I want everyone sharp, focused, and ready to make history. Throughout the ship, 800 human beings prepared to deliver a lesson in the consequences of threatening their young. The lesson began with what appeared to be a routine docking request. Council Station Omega-7, this is Captain Santos requesting permission to dock for diplomatic purposes. The station's traffic control officer, a nervous Altarian named Herval, checked his screens twice before responding. CDF Retribution, you are not cleared for docking. Please maintain your current position pending resolution of the current crisis. Roger that, Control. We'll just hold position out here while we prepare our diplomatic package. What happened next would be studied in military academies for the next century. The Retribution's cargo bay doors opened, revealing what looked like a standard diplomatic shuttle. Except this particular shuttle had been modified with stealth plating, enhanced engines, and a cargo hold containing something that would make the Council's blood run cold. The shuttle launched without fanfare, accelerating toward the station on what appeared to be a standard approach vector. Council sensors tracked it casually, just another routine diplomatic transport, right up until it vanished from their screens. Contact lost on the human shuttle, reported the station's sensor operator, a Zeltharian technician whose compound eyes were scanning his instruments frantically. It just disappeared. Station Commander Kolthek, a veteran Rigelian officer, studied the tactical display with growing unease. Malfunction? Negative, sir. The shuttle was tracking normally, then suddenly dropped off all sensors. It's like it just stopped existing. That's because it had, in a manner of speaking. The shuttle's stealth systems were based on technology humanity had acquired during their first contact with a hostile alien species 3 decades earlier. The kind of technology that made things invisible to most known sensor arrays. The shuttle reappeared exactly 17 minutes later, docked to an auxiliary airlock that should have been sealed and heavily guarded. By the time station security realized what had happened, the shuttle's crew had already completed their mission and departed. They left behind a single item in the station commander's private office, a metal container about the size of a briefcase, sitting on his desk like a gift from hell. Commander Kolthek stared at the container for a full minute before calling for his security chief. When the explosives team finally declared it safe to open, they found something that made the usually stoic Rigelian take 3 steps backward. Inside the container, packed in what appeared to be human ice, was the severed head of Officer Vexthara. But that wasn't the truly terrifying part. The terrifying part was the note attached to it, written in precise English lettering. A gift from the people of Earth to the Galactic Council. We thought you might want this back. The little girl is still in critical condition. We'll be in touch. It was signed simply, Humanity. The council chambers erupted into chaos approximately 30 seconds after Commander Kolthek's report reached the assembled representatives. Several species began demanding immediate military action. Others called for emergency evacuation protocols. The Quellians started radiating psychic distress signals that made everyone within 100 meters feel nauseated. High Counselor Vexthal was chittering so rapidly that his words became an incomprehensible buzz. Ambassador Torvin sat calmly in his chair, occasionally checking his comm device for updates on Emma Volkov's condition. "This is an act of terrorism!" screeched the Zeltharian military attaché. "The humans have violated our sovereign territory and desecrated the remains of our officer." "Actually," Torvin said mildly, "we were returning stolen property. Officer Vexthara's head belonged to her family, not to the station's morgue. We thought they might want it back for burial purposes. You infiltrated our security and planted that thing in our commander's office. We delivered a diplomatic package through proper channels. If your security couldn't detect our courier, that's not really our problem." The Altarian representative, normally the voice of reason in council discussions, spoke up in harmonious but strained tones. "Ambassador Torvin, surely you must understand how this appears. Your actions suggest a complete disregard for diplomatic protocol." Torvin turned to face the crystalline being with polite interest. "Councillor Melthar, when one of your officers assaulted a human child, were you concerned about diplomatic protocol then? That incident was regrettable, but—" "Regrettable?" Torvin's voice remained conversational, but something cold crept into his tone. "Councillor, a 12-year-old girl is fighting for her life because one of your people decided to use violence against a child. That's not regrettable. That's attempted murder. You're being deliberately inflammatory." "I'm being accurate. And since we're discussing accuracy, let me share some data with the council." Torvin activated his personal holodisplay, showing medical scans that made several representatives recoil in disgust. Emma Volkov's skull X-rays were stark and brutal. Hairline fractures spiderwebbing across the back of her head, swelling that pressed against her brain tissue. Indicators of trauma that would have killed a less resilient species. "This is what happens when an adult Zeltharian strikes a human child in the head," Torvin explained clinically. "Severe concussion, possible permanent brain damage, a 50-50 chance of survival. And your officer did this because the child was looking out a window." The chamber fell silent as the representatives studied the medical data. Several of the more peaceful species looked genuinely horrified. Even the militant Rigelians seemed disturbed by the extent of the injuries. "The child will recover," High Counselor Vexthul said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," Torvin replied. "Maybe not. But here's what's definitely going to happen. Captain Volkov is going home. All charges against him are being dropped. And the Council is going to implement new protocols to prevent this kind of incident from ever happening again. And if we refuse?" Torvin's smile was sharp enough to cut through starship armor. "High Counselor, are you familiar with the concept of proportional response in human military doctrine?" Yes, somewhat." "Good. Because our response to Officer Vexthara's assault on a human child was proportional. 1 dead officer for 1 injured child. But if you want to escalate this situation, we're happy to discuss more comprehensive solutions." The holodisplay changed, showing tactical data that made the military representatives lean forward with professional interest. Deployment patterns for human fleets, resource allocation charts, production schedules for what were obviously military shipyards. "Those are classified human military assets," the Rigelian attaché observed. "They were," Torvin agreed. "Now they're not. Consider it a gesture of transparency. We want the Council to understand exactly what they're dealing with." The data was sobering. Humanity's military buildup over the past 50 years had been far more extensive than anyone had realized. Fleets that the Council thought were merchant vessels were actually disguised warships. Mining operations that appeared to be industrial expansion were producing military-grade materials. Even the human colonization effort had been structured to support rapid military deployment. "You've been preparing for war," Councillor Melthar said, his crystalline voice carrying undertones of betrayal. "We've been preparing to defend ourselves," Torvin corrected. "There's a difference. But if you want to turn this into a war, we're ready for that too." High Counselor Vexthal's compound eyes darted between the tactical displays and the human ambassador. "What do you want from us?" "Justice for Emma Volkov. Reforms to prevent future incidents. and recognition that human children are off-limits to Council enforcement actions. That's completely reasonable, admitted the Altarian representative. We thought so too. But apparently, reasonable isn't something the Council understands without visual aids. Torvin gestured toward the chamber's main display, which suddenly showed a live feed from Commander Kolthek's office. Officer Vexthara's severed head sat on the desk like an accusation, her compound eyes staring blindly at the camera. Gentle beings of the Council, Torvin said formally, I present to you the consequences of harming human children. Officer Vexthara struck a 12-year-old girl. Captain Volkov removed Officer Vexthara's head. This is what we call natural selection in action. The chamber erupted in angry chittering, harmonic discord, and what sounded like several species praying to their respective deities. High Counselor Vexthul was making sounds that his translator couldn't even process. This is barbarism, he finally managed. This is justice, Torvin replied calmly. And if anyone else wants to test our commitment to protecting human children, we're happy to provide additional demonstrations. The medical bay of Council Station Omega-7 had become an impromptu diplomatic venue, though nobody had planned it that way. Emma Volkov lay unconscious in a bioregeneration chamber while the galaxy's most powerful beings argued over her unconscious form. Dr. Selthen, the station's chief medical officer, was a healer-class Altarian, whose crystalline structure allowed him to interface directly with biological systems. He'd been working on Emma for 6 hours straight, using techniques that represented the pinnacle of galactic medical science. The neural swelling is decreasing, he reported to the assembled group, but there may be permanent damage to her cognitive functions. The impact was severe. Captain Eric Volkov stood beside his daughter's bed, having been released from detention after what Admiral Hayes had termed aggressive diplomatic negotiations. His face was a mask of controlled emotion as he watched the medical readings. Doctor, he said quietly, what are her chances? Difficult to say. Human neurology is still somewhat unfamiliar to us, but I estimate a 70% probability of full recovery, given time. And the other 30%? Dr. Selthan's crystalline features dimmed slightly. Possible motor function impairment, memory issues, personality changes, the kind of trauma that would affect her for the rest of her life. Eric nodded slowly, his hand gently stroking Emma's blonde hair. Behind him, Admiral Hayes watched with the expression of someone calculating the cost of various military options. Captain Volkov, she said quietly, how do you want to handle this? Eric was quiet for a long moment, studying his daughter's peaceful face. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of deadly calm that made smart people start looking for exits. Admiral, what's the current status of our diplomatic negotiations? The Council is being resistant to our reasonable requests. They seem to think they can sweep this under the rug with some token gestures and bureaucratic double talk. I see. Eric's hand never stopped stroking Emma's hair. And our military position? Overwhelming, within the local area. The Council fleet here is outgunned and outmaneuvered. But if this escalates to a full galactic conflict... It won't, Eric said with absolute certainty, because they're going to give us exactly what we want. Admiral Hayes raised an eyebrow. You seem confident about that. Eric's smile was the kind that had made enemy commanders surrender without firing a shot. Admiral, the Council made one crucial mistake. They hurt my daughter in front of her father. And now they're discovering that some mistakes can't be fixed with politics and speeches. What do you have in mind? Something that will make them understand the real cost of their decision. The understanding began approximately 20 minutes later, when every communications array on Council Station Omega-7 simultaneously broadcast the same message to every inhabited system within 50 light-years. The transmission was simple, a recording of Officer Vexthara striking Emma Volkov, followed by security footage of Eric's response, then medical scans showing the extent of the child's injuries. But the real message came at the end, in Eric's own voice. My name is Captain Eric Volkov of the Human Colonial Defense Force. 3 days ago, Galactic Council Officer Vexthara assaulted my 12-year-old daughter for the crime of looking at spaceships through a window. My daughter is currently fighting for her life with severe brain trauma. Officer Vexthara is dead. To the citizens of the galaxy, this is what happens when you threaten human children. We don't negotiate. We don't compromise. We eliminate the threat permanently and completely. To the Galactic Council, you have 48 hours to implement the following changes, or this becomes everyone's problem. All charges against me are to be dropped immediately. Comprehensive medical care for my daughter will be provided at Council expense. New protocols will be established to prevent Council officers from using violence against any species' children. and Officer Vex Thara's chain of command will be held accountable for their failure to properly train their personnel. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact. You hurt our children, we hurt you back. The choice of how much pain you experience is entirely up to you. The transmission ended with a final image, Emma Volkov's medical scan side by side with Officer Vex Thara's severed head. Within minutes, the broadcast had been picked up and retransmitted by news networks across 47 systems. Within an hour, it was trending on every major communication platform in known space. The galaxy was getting its first real look at human parental instincts in action. The reaction was varied. On Altair Prime, healer-class citizens began organizing medical relief efforts for human colonies, terrified that any perceived slight might result in similar retaliation. On the Rigelian homeworld, military academies immediately began revising their tactical doctrine to account for human protective irrationality. On Zelthara, the government declared a state of emergency and began withdrawing all their citizens from human-controlled space. And in the deepest archives of the Quellian Collective, ancient texts were being hastily translated. Texts that warned of a species so protective of their young that they would sacrifice their entire civilization to avenge a single child. The texts were titled The Death World Protocols, and they had been written by the only species to ever encounter humanity before their integration into galactic society. The species was extinct. In the council chambers, panic had evolved into full-scale terror. Representatives who had been demanding Eric's execution 6 hours earlier were now falling over themselves to offer concessions. The human demands are completely reasonable, declared Councillor Melthar, his crystalline structure flickering with nervous energy. We should implement them immediately. We cannot allow terrorists to dictate council policy, chittered High Councillor Vex Thul, though his voice lacked conviction. With respect, High Councillor, said the Rigelian military attaché, these humans aren't terrorists. They're soldiers, and we just declared war on their children. One incident does not constitute... It does to them, interrupted Ambassador Torvin, who had been watching the proceedings with grim satisfaction. Gentle beings, let me explain something about human psychology that your academics seem to have missed. We're not a rational species when it comes to our young. We're a species that spent millions of years fighting predators that wanted to eat our children. Violence against human offspring triggers responses that are older than civilization. But surely reasonable discussion. High Councillor, there is no reasonable discussion. Not anymore. Captain Volkov's daughter is lying in a medical bay with brain trauma because one of your officers couldn't control her temper. Every human in the galaxy now sees the Galactic Council as a threat to their children. Do you understand what that means? The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Humans comprise nearly 15% of the galaxy's total population. They controlled key shipping routes, managed critical mining operations, and had integrated themselves into virtually every aspect of galactic commerce. If humanity decided the Council was hostile to their interests. How many human ships are currently in transit? Asked the Altarian representative. Torvin consulted his datapad. Approximately 40,000 commercial vessels, 800 military ships, and about 3 million humans living on non-human worlds. And if this situation escalates, every human ship becomes a potential weapon. Every human citizen becomes a potential saboteur. Every human colony becomes a military staging area. Torvin's smile was cold and professional. We're not just threatening you with our military, High Councillor. We're threatening you with our entire civilization. High Councillor Vexthal's compound eyes darted nervously around the chamber. What exactly do the humans want? I told you already. But since you seem to need clarification, let me be more specific. Torvin activated his holodisplay again, showing a detailed legal document. Complete medical care for Emma Volkov, including any long-term treatment she might need. Formal acknowledgement that Officer Vex Thara acted improperly. Immediate release of Captain Volkov with all charges dropped. Implementation of new protocols preventing violence against any species children by Council officers. And, his smile grew wider, a formal apology from the Council to the human people for allowing this incident to occur. That's extensive. It's comprehensive. We want to make sure this never happens again. The Rigelian attaché leaned forward. And if we agree to these terms, then this incident ends here. Captain Volkov goes home, his daughter recovers, and we all pretend this was an unfortunate misunderstanding. And if we don't? Torvin's expression grew thoughtful. Well, Admiral Hayes has been awfully patient so far, but I understand she's got some creative ideas for escalation if diplomacy fails. As if summoned by his words, the chamber's main display activated, showing the tactical situation around the station. The human fleet had grown considerably in the past few hours. What had started as a single heavy cruiser was now a full battle group, 6 major warships and enough support vessels to supply a small war. Those ships weren't there an hour ago, observed the Zeltharian representative. No, they weren't. Funny how fast human vessels can move when they're motivated. The display zoomed out, showing the broader tactical picture. Throughout human-controlled space, fleet elements were repositioning themselves near critical infrastructure. Mining stations, shipping hubs, manufacturing centers, all suddenly under the protective watch of human warships. It's a blockade, breathed the Quellian representative. It's a precaution, Torvin corrected. We're simply ensuring the safety of human assets while these negotiations continue. High Counselor Vexthal studied the display with growing horror. If humanity decided to enforce a full economic blockade, it would cripple galactic commerce within weeks. The humans had become too integrated into the galactic economy to simply cut out. How long do we have to decide? He asked weakly. Torvin checked his chronometer. Captain Volkov gave you 48 hours. That was 2 hours ago. So you have 46 hours to prevent this from becoming everyone's problem. And then? Then you find out why the last species that threatened human children isn't around to discuss the experience. The timer ran down with the inexorable precision of atomic decay. 46 hours became 24. 24 became 12. 12 became 6. Emma Volkov's condition stabilized, then began improving. Dr. Selthan's medical interventions were proving successful. The swelling in her brain had decreased, and her neural activity was returning to normal patterns. She would likely make a full recovery, though it would take time. The Council, meanwhile, was discovering that 48 hours wasn't nearly enough time to reach consensus among 47 different species, each with their own political agendas and cultural biases. We need more time, High Counselor Vexthal pleaded during an emergency session. These decisions cannot be rushed. Ambassador Torvin checked his chronometer with theatrical precision. High Counselor, you've had 3 days to figure out that assaulting children is wrong. How much more time do you need? The legal implications alone require extensive review. The legal implications are simple, interrupted Admiral Hayes, who had beamed down to the station for the final negotiations. You hurt our kid. We hurt your officer. You apologize and fix your procedures, or we hurt more of your people. Basic cause and effect. Admiral, surely you understand that the Council cannot appear to capitulate to terrorist demands. Hayes's expression grew deadly cold. High Counselor, let me explain something to you about terrorism. Terrorists attack civilians to achieve political goals. Captain Volkov killed a military officer who assaulted his daughter. That's not terrorism, that's justified homicide. The distinction is that terrorists negotiate. Captain Volkov stated his terms and gave you a deadline. When that deadline expires, negotiation ends and implementation begins. Implementation of what? Admiral Hayes smiled, and every alien in the chamber felt their various blood analogs turn cold. Phase 2. Phase 2 began exactly 48 hours after Eric's ultimatum, when every human ship in the galaxy simultaneously stopped moving. Commercial vessels carrying critical supplies to non-human worlds simply shut down their engines and drifted in space. Mining operations ceased production. Manufacturing facilities went dark. Transport ships carrying passengers between systems activated emergency protocols and began searching for the nearest human-controlled port. Within 6 hours, the galactic economy ground to a halt. This is economic warfare! High Counselor Vexthal chittered frantically as reports flooded in from across known space. They're holding the entire galaxy hostage! No, Admiral Hayes replied calmly from the Council chambers. We're protecting human assets during a period of elevated threat levels, perfectly reasonable security measures. You cannot seriously claim that shutting down galactic commerce is a security measure. High Counselor, you refused our reasonable requests for justice, so we're implementing our own security protocols. Every human ship, every human facility, every human citizen is now operating under wartime conditions until this matter is resolved. The tactical displays around the chamber showed the scope of the crisis. Critical supply routes severed, medical shipments stranded in space, emergency services cut off from their support networks. The highly integrated galactic economy was discovering just how dependent it had become on human infrastructure. People will die, protested the Altarian representative. Yes, Hayes agreed. They will. Because the Council chose to protect Officer Vexthara's reputation instead of admitting she was wrong to assault a human child. This is madness! This is proportional response. You escalated a simple assault case into a galactic crisis. We're responding accordingly. High Counselor Vexthal's compound eyes darted between the status reports flooding his screens. Food shortages were already beginning on some worlds. Medical emergencies were going untreated due to lack of supplies. The Zeltharian homeworld was reporting civil unrest as news of Vexthara's death spread. What will it take to end this? he asked desperately. Admiral Hayes consulted her datapad with professional calm. The same things we asked for originally. Medical care for Emma Volkov. Formal apology. New protocols. Accountability for the chain of command that allowed this to happen. And immediate implementation of these protocols within 30 days. We want to see concrete changes, not just promises. The legal review alone will take months. Then you should have started working on it 48 hours ago. The chamber fell silent except for the continuous stream of emergency reports. The Council was learning a hard lesson about the interconnected nature of modern galactic society, and humanity's central role in keeping it functioning. There's something else, Hayes added casually. Emma Volkov woke up an hour ago. The aliens turned to stare at her. She's recovered? She's conscious and coherent. No apparent cognitive damage. She asked for her father, and wanted to know if she could still see the spaceships. High Counselor Vexthal sagged in relief. Then surely this crisis can be resolved amicably. High Counselor, Hayes interrupted. Emma Volkov will carry the scars of this assault for the rest of her life. The fact that she's recovered doesn't erase what your officer did to her. It just means we're not adding murder charges to Officer Vexthara's posthumous record. But if the child is well, the child is 12 years old and was brutally assaulted by a council officer for looking out a window. The fact that she survived doesn't make that acceptable. Hayes stood up, her presence seeming to fill the chamber. Gentle beings, let me make this crystal clear. Humanity doesn't forgive attacks on our children. We don't forget, and we don't let them go unpunished. The only question is whether you want to end this crisis with a formal apology and some procedural changes, or whether you want to find out what Phase 3 looks like. Phase 3? Vexthal asked weakly. Admiral, Ambassador Torvin said quietly. Perhaps we should... Phase 3, Hayes continued, is when we stop playing by your rules entirely. When human colonies declare independence from Council authority. When human ships start carrying military escorts. When we begin treating the Galactic Council as a hostile foreign power, rather than an organization we're part of. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If humanity withdrew from the Council, it would effectively split the galaxy into two competing power blocks. The economic disruption would be catastrophic. The political ramifications would destabilize centuries of carefully negotiated treaties. You would risk galactic war over one incident? The Quellian representative asked. We would risk galactic war to protect human children, Hayes replied. Every time, without hesitation, without compromise. Without exception. High Counselor Vexthal looked around the chamber at his fellow representatives. The Altarians were radiating panic. The Regellians were calculating military odds. Even the normally stoic Quellians seemed disturbed by the scope of humanity's response. The Council formally apologizes for Officer Vexthara's inappropriate use of force against the human child Emma Volkov, he said finally. We acknowledge that her actions were contrary to Council protocols and galactic law. Good start, Hayes said. Continue. All charges against Captain Eric Volkov are hereby dropped. The Council will provide full medical coverage for Emma Volkov's treatment and any long-term care she may require. And the protocols? New procedures will be implemented within 30 days to prevent Council officers from using force against any species' children except in cases of immediate physical danger to themselves or others. And accountability? High Counselor Vexthal's mandibles drooped in defeat. Officer Vexthara's immediate supervisor and the station's security chief will be disciplined for failure to properly train and oversee their personnel. Admiral Hayes considered this for a moment, then nodded. Acceptable. Emma Volkov will be transferred to a human medical facility for continued treatment. Captain Volkov will be released immediately, and the economic disruption will end as soon as these agreements are formally signed and distributed. And the head? Will be returned to Officer Vexthara's family for proper burial, along with our condolences for their loss. The chamber erupted in relieved chittering, harmonic resonance, and what sounded like several species offering prayers of thanksgiving to their respective deities. Admiral Hayes gathered her materials with the satisfaction of someone who had just concluded a successful business negotiation. Gentle beings, it's been educational. I trust we won't need to have this conversation again. Admiral, High Counselor Vexthal called out as she headed for the exit. This cannot become precedent. The Council cannot allow every species to resort to violence when they disagree with our decisions. Hayes paused at the chamber's entrance and turned back with a smile that would have made predatory fish nervous. High Counselor, you're absolutely right. This cannot become precedent, which is why you're going to make sure that Council officers never again assault anyone's children. Because if this happens again, we won't bother with negotiations at all. She left the chamber in absolute silence. 3 days later, Captain Eric Volkov sat beside his daughter's bed in the human medical facility on New Geneva. Emma was recovering rapidly under the care of doctors who understood human physiology, though she still tired easily and had frequent headaches.
Dad, she said quietly, why did that alien lady hit me?
Eric considered his answer carefully. At 12, Emma was old enough to understand some of the complexity of the situation, but young enough that he didn't want to burden her with the full political implications. Because she was scared, he said finally. Some people, when they're scared or confused, they do things they shouldn't do. But I wasn't doing anything wrong. No, sweetheart, you weren't. You were just being curious and excited about seeing new things.
That's never wrong.
Emma was quiet for a moment, absently touching the bandages on her head. Dad, are we still going to visit other planets after what happened? Eric smiled and took her hand. Emma, we're going to visit every planet you want to see. And if anyone tries to stop you from looking at spaceships, they're going to have to deal with me. And Admiral Hayes? And Admiral Hayes, and every other human in the galaxy. Emma grinned, the first real smile she'd shown since the incident. Cool. Can we go to that planet with the purple oceans next? I want to see if their fish are purple too. We'll go wherever you want, kiddo. Epilogue. 6 months later. The Volkov Protocols, as they came to be known throughout the galaxy, were implemented with unprecedented speed and efficiency. Council officers now received mandatory training on interspecies cultural sensitivity, with particular emphasis on the protection of juveniles. The use of force against any species' children required approval from at least 3 supervisors and detailed justification reports. The protocols were never needed. After word spread about Officer Vexthara's fate, Council personnel became remarkably careful around human families. The sight of a human child was enough to make most officers excuse themselves from duty and call for backup. The galactic economy recovered quickly once human ships resumed operations, but the underlying power dynamics had shifted permanently. Humanity was no longer seen as a junior member of the galactic community, but as a force to be carefully respected and never antagonized. Emma Volkov recovered completely from her injuries and went on to become one of the galaxy's most celebrated xenobiologists. Her childhood experience taught her the importance of understanding other species, both their strengths and their dangerous blind spots. Eric Volkov returned to his duties with the Colonial Defense Force, but found that his reputation preceded him wherever he went. He became something of a legend among human military personnel, the man who reminded the galaxy that human children were off limits. Officer Vexthara was buried on her homeworld with full honors, her family's grief tempered by their understanding that she had died defending Council authority. The fact that she had been wrong to assault a child was mentioned only in private conversations, and even then in whispered tones. And in the deepest archives of the Galactic Council, a new file was created and classified at the highest security levels. It contained detailed psychological profiles of human protective instincts, tactical assessments of human military capabilities, and strategic recommendations for avoiding future conflicts. The file was titled, Species 2847H, Death World Protocols, Updated. The first line read, Under no circumstances should Council personnel interact with human juveniles without explicit human supervision and approval. The last line was simpler. They weren't kidding about the children. Somewhere in the vast archives, an ancient Quellian text seemed to whisper a warning that the galaxy had learned too late. When you threaten the young of a Death World species, you don't get negotiations. You get extinction. But humanity, in their infinite mercy, had settled for just ahead. This time, the end.